Hi, I'm Mike Brofman. Welcome to the third installment of Brooklyn Art Song Society's series Song and Wine. This time I am joined with pianist Jonathan Ware, who is the mastermind behind Schubert & Co., which is presenting, and has been and will be presenting, the complete songs of Schubert over a year about?
Yes, from September of last year till May of this year.
Yeah, so about 600 songs. It's a great project. Somehow this Song and Wine thing can't escape Schubert. This is the third one in a row we've done on Schubert. But I promise next one is Libby Larsen, so this is the last. This is our Schwanege song to Schubert on Song and Wine. So our wine today, our unofficial sponsor, because they don't know it, is Vivalis. I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And it's a white wine. And I know nothing about wine, except that I like drinking it and talking about art song. So why don't we give it a test, make sure it's worthy. Cheers. That's nice. Good. It's like sweet. It's yummy. I'm a fan.
It's very nice.
Yes. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask you is if you could give us the origin story of Schubert & Co., kind of what inspired you to do it, and how you kind of got all the forces together and all that. Anything
related
to that?
Well, I'm actually only one member of a two-person mastermind team behind Schubert & Co. And the other member was Lachlan Glenn, and he's a fellow pianist, and he's doing his master's at Juilliard right now with Brian Ziegler, and Brian Ziegler was my teacher when I was at Juilliard. Mm-hmm. And this past summer, Lachlan and I were in Zwickau, Germany, in the eastern part of Germany, which is Schumann's hometown, at the Schumann competition. And we were both playing for several singers for the competition, and we were staying in the same apartment with the singers that we were playing with, and it was a lot of fun. It was a really fun, relaxing time, just sort of focusing on Schumann's music, playing for our singers, and really just having a lot of free time. Mm-hmm. It was at the beginning of June, so it was right after the final push of last semester, which is always crazy. Yeah. And so we spent quite a bit of time practicing and rehearsing and in the competition, but then we also spent quite a bit of time just enjoying ourselves with the singers and friends who were there. And so we went to several beer gardens, coffee houses, all things like that. Mm-hmm. And in the course of one of our conversations at, I think it was a Czech pub, and I think we were having this amazing goulash, I think it was Lachlan who said, you know, if you had a year and a concert every week, you could really do all the Schubert songs in the course of a semester. And we kind of paused after he said that and thought about it a little bit, and both decided, well, why not? Why not go ahead and try? It's complete madness to try, but why not? We're both young and stupid and don't know that it can't be done yet, so let's try it. So we, immediately after we said let's try it, we started researching our options. We sent an email to Brian Ziegler, who was behind the project, and also thought we were crazy, but really stepped behind the project, and we started just contacting singers. And so several of the singers who we contacted in Zwickau, we were sort of with them at the beginning, and they have been Simone Easthope and Jasmine McNeil, and also Natalie Mittelbach. They've been some of the singers who have been most involved with the project because they were sort of there at its inception. Yeah. But Lachlan and I spent the next sort of 2 weeks really just sending out emails to all of our friends who are singers saying, hey, we have this project called Schubert and Company, and we'd like to try to do the complete Schubert songs in New York City in a series of, it's going to end up being about 34 concerts in this coming year. Yeah. Are you interested? Would you like to sing some songs with us? It's a project that's been totally pro bono. Everyone is involved because they love the music, and to have such an outpouring of support from the singers as well as from Brian Ziegler, who's played a concert, and Malcolm Martineau also joined us a couple of weeks ago to share a concert, which was amazing to have him and these wonderful, the people really at the top of the field really involved and happy to see this project come to fruition. It's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, that's what I sort of love about doing art song, is that it's, well, on one side there is, it's an art form that there's just so much passion for. The people who want to do it will really go above and beyond to be able to do it. Yeah. And there's a sense that opportunities to do it are somewhat scarce or somewhat special.
Right.
So when people are offered it, they, so you can work with really high quality people, and they're much more accessible for that reason, because they want those opportunities as much as you do, whereas opposed to, potentially doing chamber music with really great string players, they can get that opportunity very easily, whereas a singer, when you're offering them an art song concert, they're, they'll jump at it.
That's really true. It's an art form that I think really does have an audience, even in New York and in non-German speaking places. But it is a little bit more of a sort of a niche audience. So, but one thing I've been really moved by is how even audience members who don't necessarily get it, they get it.
Yeah.
Because it's good music, and
exactly.
a lot of the time it's good poetry, and those forces combined, even if it's not readily understood, as if someone were singing in English, it's still people get it, and people are moved by it, and it's a repertoire that's moving to people and touching, and I think necessary. Yeah,
I've definitely found, doing with Brooklyn Art Song Society, a lot of people who come not even knowing what art song is. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really not, there's a sort of, it gets a sort of bad rap as being so, because it's so text and how it relates to the music, as sort of esoteric, sort of you have to know intimately the language and the details and the nuance of it, that it's unapproachable. But when people come, and if you just sell it as like, this is music that I like and enjoy, and don't just sort of present it with enthusiasm, I think people enjoy it way more than it's sort of given credit for.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, sometimes it's okay to enjoy it because it's beautiful, good music,
Yeah, and it's also, language, you don't have to understand. There is a way to enjoy it where you understand every single word, and there's, infinite amount of depth of language and music connecting. But also, all the text painting, all the little nuances are really in a great song, going to the end of creating a general overall ambience. Right. If you just set every word, every time he says hi, go high, and every time it goes low, go low, and every question goes, if you just do that without any sort of overlying emotional content to the song, it's going to be a very bad song. And so you don't need to understand every single nuance. It's just like if you look at, say a Monet painting, you don't have to be able to know every single shade of color and what it's called to just appreciate the scenery. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yes, you can be an art connoisseur and understand every kind of nuance of brushstroke and every kind of, theory thing behind it, but you can also just look at the painting and I think it's the same with a song. You can just listen to it and just in the broadest sense understand, this flower is beautiful, or I'm sad because my girlfriend left me. Yeah. And I
think I think you're touching on something that I think is an important part of song performance, is that the parties who are actually doing the song had better know all of that.
Yeah.
And then it starts to, if you know the words, it starts to color how you're playing it.
Yeah. At
the piano, and of course it's coloring the words as they're coming out of the singer's mouth, and whether or not the listener is consciously aware of that or not. Yeah. It's like a kind of the strophic song predicament or strophic song exercise, is that the song the musical bit changes each time
Yeah.
because something's happened in the story or something different has happened in the text. And it's not necessarily something that I think the listeners have to be able to say, oh, well, the pianist is now articulating the tenor voice instead of the soprano voice. Or, oh, it's now the accompaniment has slightly more energetic feeling in the second verse. But it's something that hopefully, and those things may all be true, but it's something that hopefully the listener recognizes as more of an emotional journey in the song. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's always with strophic songs, and I found, well, it wasn't actually described with a strophic song, but I think it applies. I remember someone describing the last movement, the variation movement of Beethoven's Opus 109 Sonata, where the theme starts with the theme, it has variations, and it comes back with the theme repeated
at the end. Yeah.
And they said, the music's the same, but now the listener is different.
Huh.
And I like that
nice.
as it applies to strophic songs. As you hear the music over and over again and go through the story, the music stays the same, but you as the listener have gone through the story and your impression of it's different. And that sort of, I like that idea.
That's a nice idea. Yeah. I always think of Opus 109, the theme at the end. It's just my imagination, but an die Ferne Geliebte of Beethoven, there's the song that's being sung to the beloved, and I always feel as if that song is actually Opus 109.
That song kind of works the same way emotionally as that, where you go through this big journey, and
then you get back to the
you just come back to where you started,
but it's different.
Yeah, which is kind of, I think that, that cycle is very much, and I think a lot of song is like that, in Frühling, where you start with an idea, you go someplace else, and then you come back to the original idea, but it's different because of what's happened before. So my next question on my list is, well, I am one who has been guilty of ambitious and large projects that are, I think, crazy is the word used. We broke out our songs, we did the complete Charles Ives songs in one day, in about a 4.5-hour concert.
That's amazing. That's too many. I think that's probably as many notes as the complete Schubert songs.
Yeah,
right there.
Just
in 4 hours.
Just to Charlie Rutledge.
As opposed to
Yeah.
About 40 hours for Schubert.
And I find it interesting, the idea of doing something complete, or doing something in its entirety. I think I'm really interested, but I want to, what do you think, what is your, you could have just done a bunch of Schubert. You could have just done Schubert's greatest hits.
Right.
You could have just done, the song cycles. We did a Schubert festival. It was Schubert, and it was just the last year.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even all, it was the songs and so the four-hand works and the piano sonatas, the last 3 piano sonatas. That was like 4, borderline too long concerts. And we didn't do the string quintet. There's a mass. The last 2 symphonies. There's a gajillion. So, but what do you think is, why are you drawn to the idea of doing something complete?
Complete.
Or either specifically Schubert or in general.
Right. Well, with the Schubert project, I think Lachlan and I were both sort of just taken with just this initial statement of his, that when he said, if you had a series in which you had a concert every week, Juilliard does a series for the collaborative pianists, and they have Liederabende, they have song evenings, and then they have Sonatenabends, so they have song evenings and sonata evenings.
Yeah.
And this concert series happens actually roughly once a week.
Yeah.
And so we were sort of thinking of a program like that, where we could have sort of semi-regular concerts. And so the idea just sort of came that Schubert's works in the song realm would fill a program, a series that had a concert every week. And then I think we both were so taken by the idea, just because he's sort of he's the song composer.
Yeah.
I mean, there are others and some some might challenge that statement, but I think he really is for many of us sort of the one who kind of codified
it's almost like everyone,
what a song is.
Everyone after him was just almost trying to do what he was doing.
Who was doing what he was doing, or sort of varying what he was doing, or building on top of it.
Almost in the same way that like anybody who wrote counterpoint after Bach had to be compared. You have to
compare him to Bach. Yeah, you sort of compare all the other song composers, I think, in a way.
Especially the German ones.
The German ones get sort of compared to Schubert, and so. So I think we were taken with the idea of doing them complete, also because it hasn't been done before in New York. It's been attempted, but it didn't end up happening. They started to go chronologically, and so then you get some of the burden songs.
Yeah.
Too many of them in an order in a row, and then the gems kind of come.
That was actually
all at once, or you have sort of holes of, and then also just in terms of personnel, then you end up giving
all the great songs,
like all the really good songs to singer A, and then singers B and C maybe get not so many great songs, and we wanted to be. We wanted to give songs to everyone that would show them off well.
Exactly.
And that would also show the music off well.
That was like, so the problem we had when we did the Ives was that if you do the Ives in the order that we did the 114 songs that are published in that book, if you do that, the order is what I basically call it, it's in Benjamin Button order, in that it's in reverse chronological order. That the first, song number 1 is the last song he wrote, roughly. And then it goes, all the songs from the 1920s and late teens are all like the first 50 songs, and then it starts going backwards to his earlier songs. So if you did it especially if you're doing it in a marathon concert that's 4.5 hours long, you have all the great masterpieces and all that thorny modern
at the very beginning,
all in a row, like right in the beginning, and then you have like 2.5 hours of like the parlor songs and like the jokey you know, and the songs he wrote when he was 10 to his dog and like and stuff like that. And so if you do that, like you're doing it doesn't make sense as an art. And so we did kind of, well, I guess we didn't do it by Pope, but I came up with an order that made sense to itself, that mixed the you know, sort of parlor songs with the really modern songs. Some of them were organized by theme, like all the religion songs were kind of in a row, so you could compare them and stuff like that. It's just so that, you know, especially with Ives, I found that because the whole point of Ives is he's so eclectic that when you do his complete songs, it doesn't feel like you're doing one composer, it's more you feel like you're doing five
different schizophrenic composers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny we're talking about Ives because the venue for these concerts is Central Presbyterian Church, which is my church. It's at 64th and Park Avenue, and this was the church at which Charles Ives was the music director and organist.
Oh, really?
Actually.
Oh, that's
so it's a kind of a funny connection. That's, I think, just a happy coincidence. But
that's actually
I didn't know.
But well, it's actually funny. Somebody who's a sort of a supporter of ours, she was really excited about this Ives project because her family comes from a fair amount of wealth, and Charles Ives was an insurance salesman as much as he was a composer. More than he was a composer. He was an insurance salesman, but he was, and apparently what his insurance was investment risk management. You know, like, and so he sold a certain form of insurance, and when the stock market crashed in 1929, all the insurance companies that did what he did, you know, basically insured investments, all went under because like everyone went bankrupt all at the same time. But he was like one of the few insurance companies that paid out because he did his model smartly, you know, wisely. So this person was sort of like, by helping us supporting this concert, sort of paying it forward because her family was saved from financial ruin because of Charles Ives.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, I've looked. This is sort of a broader point about art song that I feel like it has this way of being like super intimate. I mean, it's very intimate. It's meant for like small, but it has this way of being of you find all these like intimate relationships with it, you know, these sort of personal anecdotes that have to do with art song in a weird way. They just keep popping up. That kind of like I don't know if you feel this way with Schubert. I felt this way with Schubert when I did the last year cycle. When you sort of immerse yourself into like one composer like this, especially with art songs again because it's so intimate. I feel like I start to like know them personally. Like I start referring. By the end of the Arves project, I was referring to him as Charlie. Like when I just like
that's funny. Yeah.
I just felt like I somehow felt like I had sat down and had a beer with these composers less than I had studied their music.
It's really interesting because once you've played a certain amount of a composer's output, you start to recognize patterns, or you start to get to know them.
Yeah.
And so when Schubert writes Etwas geschwind on a song that you don't know, then you think of the 5 songs you do know, in which he wrote Etwas geschwind at the top, somewhat fast.
Yeah.
And then you think, oh, well, then the tempo has to be this. Give or take, 5 beats per minute on either side. Or you see him start to use a pattern, like the pattern at the beginning of Der Lindenbaum, the triplets. And I mean, what is this song about? It's about many things, but I think that figure in the song is sort of the wind and the linden tree's fragrance, sort of wafting through the air, and then you see this figure in Abendbilder, you see this figure in Nachthymne, and you see it in several other songs where he's also talking about fragrance and sort of wind and fragrance going through the air, and you think, oh, well, it's not that he's copying himself because the figure sounds completely different in the songs, but it's sort of, oh, well, when you see this and you see this in the music, this is Schubert's way of creating a smell in an environment and creating a beautiful fragrance.
Yeah.
And just other things like that, you start to, like you say, feel like you get to know them, and it's kind of funny though.
Yeah, it's weird.
And you start noticing patterns, and you get good at learning Schubert really quickly.
Yeah. I found like when you learn that much of one composer, it's like I always found like it's almost like when I read a novel, like it takes me about the same amount of time to read the first 20 pages as it does the next like 200. Because it's like when you're first reading it, you're like trying to figure out the characters, you're trying to figure out the voice, but every good author has sort of like a rhythm to their language, and once you like chime into that, you can start reading really fast. So it's like, the first Schubert song, you take these, like I remember when I learned Schwanege song, it had this sort of steamroll, a snowball effect to me, where it was like just once you start getting in that groove, and I'm sure your ear, without even realizing, is picking up on the patterns and stuff like that. Without you start to be able to fill in the blanks a little bit, like you start to be able to anticipate what's coming up, rather than just sort of like it being a surprise every time. So
one thing that has been a surprise is how much all of the Schubert songs, even his first extant song, Hagar's Klage, which he wrote when he was 14, how much all of the Schubert songs actually sound like Schubert. Like they all, some of the early songs don't sound like Schubert the whole way through. Sometimes they sound a little bit like, oh, well, that sounds a little, I don't know, Mozart or something. And that song in particular was modeled on a Zumsteck song, but it's been a surprise to me that even the bad songs, and we haven't found so many bad songs. Some are less inspired than others, but how much they all sound like Schubert. I guess it makes sense because they're all written by the same guy, but
it's all he got his voice early.
He had his voice early, I think.
Yeah, and it's also like you kind of bring up a couple times having to bring up the burden songs. I feel like there is a danger, and you have to be smart when you do these sort of projects that are when you're doing, especially doing sort of that's not arbitrary, but an amount of music that had no intention of being performed together. Like the
Right.
complete. So like Schubert wasn't writing his 600 songs, being like, one day there will be.
One day they're going
Yeah.
to do this complete series of all my music in New York.
And you know, so there's no sense. So but because you don't want it to feel like a musicology project. You know,
Right.
you don't want to feel like you're just arbitrarily doing it so that, you know, as like a catalog of.
Right.
So that sort of brings me to and I think the big thing of that is the order that you do things
Yeah.
in. And that's why often I think doing things chronologically, besides what you mentioned of, you end up making sort of all, you know, it tends to be composers as they mature their song, you know, their music gets better. And so you end up having to do their juvenilia all first and then all their great stuff all
Right.
together later. Very rarely do composers, well, in some cases they write all their good stuff first and then everything later.
Everything later is
Either way,
bad, but
that's not
it's
it does not that satisfying. But so I think the order you do things in is one way. You have to think of the order as a. So you organize these songs in an interesting way that makes sense, but I actually had never thought of is organizing it by the poet who wrote the text rather
Right.
than by when it was written or anything. And so, what is your logic behind that? And why would you do that?
Well, when Lachlan and I were really at the very beginning stages, I mean, really a week into it or 2 weeks into it, we were really trying to figure out this past summer, how will we organize it? And the first idea we had that seemed like a really good one was to go chronologically, because I mean, how cool would that to sort of track the way his composition changed, and then we started to think, well, but you get all the good songs at the end, and lots of good songs at the beginning, but then there's maybe that's not the best way to do it. And then we also thought about personnel, about singers, and sometimes singers get sick, and so they're not able to appear in the concert in which we expected them to appear. So that was really another strike against trying to do the project chronologically, because inevitably that wouldn't have been possible. With sickness
and once you like
other
miss one song,
indispositions.
it's over.
You miss one song and then you think, well, we can't really sell this as a chronological thing now, can we? So then we looked for other options. I thought of the possibility of sort of creating a theme for each concert, like, you know, Schubert death songs. I mean, that could fill several concerts. Or songs on night songs. And then at the end of the day, that sort of seemed like an interesting idea, but we weren't taken with it. And then we decided to go by poet. And I think it's been a good decision, because we've been able to offer concerts that have, we had one concert that was just a Goethe concert, and we have a couple more Goethe concerts sort of peppered out throughout the season. We had a Schiller weekend back in December, which was really successful. And we have, coming up at the beginning of March, there's some more Schiller songs, and then some Schlegel songs, the Schlegel brothers. And Meyerhofer concert. So it's been a more flexible way to present the songs, but still have sort of a binding tie. And also a way to just kind of investigate and see if others hear what I hear, that Schubert did change his compositional style with a different poet.
That's actually was kind of going to be the second I was about to ask. Do you find that the poet has a voice through Schubert? That there's a commonality, like all the songs by, say, you know, Heine, or all the songs by Goethe have some sort of thread that connects them, besides just the poet happens to be the same.
I'd say, to me, the most obvious one has seemed to be Meyerhofer, and maybe just because Schubert and Meyerhofer were friends, and Schubert said so much Meyerhofer, and also just the pessimism that's prevalent in most of the Meyerhofer poetry. seems to bring out something really romantic and dramatic in Schubert. So I feel like there's a kind of a dark, brooding voice in Schubert's Meyerhofer.
Well, it's certainly the topic is, certain poets write about certain things, and like if someone like from Schwanenger's song, like all the Steedle songs tend to be hey, look, that brook is nice, and like, hey, that bird is cool, and like so, and whereas opposed to the something like Winterreise, where the poetry is actually like all about like doom and gloom, or like I noticed like in Schwanenger's song, which is the one cycle I've played a lot, it's basically, it almost seems like it's two unfinished cycles just smushed together. The first is the Steidl songs, and there's a Heine, which seems
the Heine songs.
Which sort of seems to be the beginning of a cycle that just he didn't finish. And then they stick to Tabapost at the end because it's the last song he wrote, but it's not one of the Heine songs. And actually, the last song of the first half is Abschied, and it's this happy-go-lucky guy getting off, going off to do whatever he's going to do in town. He's all happy. He's getting out of his small little bumpkiny town and going wherever he's going. And then the next song after that is Der Atlas, and it's just like a smack in the face in terms of tonal shift.
Right.
And it's like, to me, it's a jarring how it showed how the changing the poet could so drastically change
the song.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I noticed, we had 2 weeks ago we did a Wilhelm Müller, Wilhelm Meister concert focusing on all the Mignon and the Höfner songs, and I had always thought that Meyerhofer was the most, sort of drew the most dramatic songs out of Schubert, but there's some really crazy writing in the Wilhelm Meister songs, and in the Höfner songs especially. Schubert wasn't afraid to put 3 fortes and then 2 measures later 3 pianos, and if you actually sort of do what the map says and actually do what's written, it sounds like Schoenberg almost. It's so jarring. Yeah. And so sometimes even within with Goethe, of course, and sometimes within an author's work, depending whether it's a separate poem or it's within a narrative like these songs, where Schubert's voice seems to change along with that as well. Yeah, so. And I think
I brought this up in our when we had a conversation about the late piano sonatas. It was the first one of these shindigs, and I brought up, and I think it's really true, how Schubert kind of gets a rap a little bit as being, kind of like a conservative, or like aesthetic, in that it's it's extremely tonal. It's all about sort of melody and accompaniment, and that it somehow caters to a more conservative aesthetic, his music. But I actually think in many ways he was a very radical composer, and I think a lot of musical decisions he makes are extremely jarring and just surprising, and purposely so. He's especially as you get later, and he starts shifting between major and minor much more dramatically and quickly, with less and less preparation.
Absolutely. I think even in some of the earlier works, thinking Der Tod, Oscar, and some of the other Ossian songs, and even this first song that that's been published that he wrote, Hagar's Klage, that there are in the rest sections such crazy harmonic shifts that maybe he honed a little bit in his later years and made like a little bit less jarring. But it's quite dramatic what he does.
And I think the origin of it is he was really the first composer who basically, since he was sort of essentially the inventor of Lieder, that was responding, would have music just respond to the text, regardless of like the rules of composition.
Right.
If if the poem was one sentence was happy and then the next one was sad, he wouldn't care that, in order to modulate somewhere there's certain rules of how to do it. It's like, no, in the first line you have to be in major, and the second line it's going to be in minor. It doesn't matter the rules of how you get from point A to point B in terms of, theory and analysis. It's just what the poetry demands. So he did a lot of the first, modulations to really foreign keys in the ways that he did it, and a lot of the extreme modal mixture that made the, whether it was, once you make it ambiguous whether it's major and minor, that's sort of the first step in a long process that ends up being ambiguous what key you're in at all,
Right.
to make it just being atonal. That was sort of the teeny tiny, pebble that became the giant snowball. And I think it really has to do with just responding to text, that he would just do what the text demanded be done in a certain way. And in that way, I think art song is, which sometimes gets put peripherally in sort of music history as sort of, it's a little subgenre, had a lot to do into what happened with sonata form, what happened with symphony, what happened with Wagner and opera in a lot of ways that it doesn't really get credit for, I feel.
Well, that's a good point.
But, well, I'm almost out of wine. I think you're doing pretty good too. So, before we conclude, we should have some shameless plugs of the upcoming
Shameless
dates.
plug, yes.
Upcoming dates for Schubert and Company. Tell everyone also where they are at and your website.
Sure, yeah. Well, Schubert and Company, our website is schubertandco.org, and online on that site you'll see a list of all of our upcoming concerts. And the general rule of thumb is that we have concerts every Sunday evening at 6 p.m., except for the second Sunday of every month. And all these concerts are held at Central Presbyterian Church at 64th and Park Avenue on the east side. And a couple of the concerts coming up that we're really excited about is the 17th of February. We have a really great sort of mixed program. It has several poets smattered throughout the concert. And some of those poets, let me just check, von Leitner, von Schlechter, Klopstock. And then coming up at the beginning of March, there's a whole weekend of concerts. I think it's best if you look at the website, or I'll start spouting off wrong days and times. But some really great songs by Schiller, including his big ballad, Der Taucher. There's Jesse Blumberg singing, and we met last week, and he's sounded great on it. And also coming up on that weekend is a Schlegel program, which I'm excited about. It's kind of a set that Schubert intended to make into a cycle.
I'm playing.
And you're playing that.
I'm playing them, I
so
think. I will be there at my second concert.
Song Society cross-pollination thing going on.
Yes, and my shameless plug time, check out www.brooklynartsongsociety.org, and you can follow us at Twitter, Brooklyn Art Song, or you can like us on Facebook. And our next concert's not until March. It's March 23rd. It's our new music series, In Context, where we're going to have, working with the great American composer Libby Larsen, and we're also doing works by Duparc, Schumann, and Charlie Ives. Also, sometime in March, look out, sitting in that chair will be Libby herself. So that's next up on Song and Wine.
Lovely.
Yes, and I'm really excited for that. I'm gonna make a drunken fool of myself in front of her. So, till next time, that's Song and Wine. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
Cheers.